Well, hello. Hi, congratulations. Thanks for taking the time out. I know you guys must be really busy, but Megan, can you tell me what's like greater than great to see you? You've got this blockbuster book. I've been reveling in your extracts. Very juicy stuff. Greater than you know. The word bombshell gets thrown around far too easily, but in this telling, it finally earns its weight. Because if there's one thing Tom Bauer understands better than anyone else, it's timing. Music he doesn't rush. He doesn't shout into the void and hope something sticks. He waits. He listens. He lets the room fill with tension until it's thick enough to choke on. And only then does he strike the match. Greater than good morning. Greater than, you know. We hear the word bombshell, and I think certainly it's true in this case. Megan, Harry, in the war between the greater than in this story, music, the match didn't land quietly. It landed when the Sussex narrative was already soaked in gasoline. They're setting themselves up in California as apostles of wellness, sincerity, and love. One commentator scoffed in a televised panel. Yet they've done the exact opposite. They've dumped on their family, dumped on Britain, and now they're shocked people are asking questions. What no one expected, what Harry certainly didn't expect music, was how deep those questions were about to go. Setting up in California to spread wellness and love and sincerity have done the exact opposite. Music greater than because this time Bauer wasn't circling the edges. He wasn't teasing character flaws or resurfacing old grievances. He was aiming straight at the foundation. And the moment he hinted, Just Music hinted that he was sitting on material capable of collapsing the Sussex story in a single catastrophic music blow. Harry didn't react like a man secure in the truth. He reacted like someone cornered. Within hours, legal threats allegedly began flying in this account. Messages passed through intermediaries, warnings whispered to editors and producers, words like defamation, injunction, music retraction, tossed around like smoke grenades. The goal wasn't clarity. It was silence. Shut it down. Smother it before it caught. Music, but Tom Bauer didn't blink. Instead, he did something far more dangerous than shouting. He slowed down. Music, he let it be known carefully, surgically, that what he was preparing to release wasn't gossip, not vibes, not anonymous chatter scraped from the internet. It was evidence, documents, music records, timelines, witnesses, the kind of material that doesn't need defending because it stands on its own. And then music came the sentence that changed everything. "This isn't about rumors," he said calmly in one interview. "This is about paternity." That's when the air left the room. Sought solace after she died. And where I knew I had found a soulmate in music, my wife. Greater than because in this ordeal, questioning the legitimacy of a royal child isn't tabloid sport. It's existential. It strikes at bloodlines, titles, inheritance, and the one thing any monarchy, real or imagined, cannot afford to gamble with certainty. Harry's reaction, as the story tells it, was immediate and volcanic. Phones thrown, doors slammed, advisors frozen out. He demanded lawsuits, demanded statements, demanded it all be crushed into dust. But beneath the fury wasn't confidence, it was panic. Because if the claims were pure nonsense, there was a single nuclear option that could end the entire story in seconds. One test, one confirmation. Music, one clean, undeniable answer. And yet, no one reached for it. What Bauer hinted at next was far more precise, almost clinical. He suggested the information he was preparing to release tied together sealed pregnancy records, unexplained travel anomalies, and an early connection between Meghan Markle and a wealthy Colombian businessman whose name, until now, had never survived mainstream scrutiny. The internet, predictably, went feral. Flight logs resurfaced. Charity trips were re-examined. Old interviews were slowed down, dissected frame by frame. Dates were circled. Screenshots resurrected from forgotten corners of the web. A pattern began to form that in music this telling looked disturbingly coherent. And then came the witness. Not a faceless source, not a distorted voice, but a man the public already knew. A man written out of the fairy tale like an inconvenient prologue. Meghan's first husband, Trevor Engelson, silent for years until now. Before Trevor even spoke in this narrative, the internet detonated again. At exactly 12:40 a.m. West Coast time, when gossip spreads fastest and defenses are weakest, An anonymous account appeared, no profile photo, no history, one music post, one image. One sentence, everyone thinks they know. They know nothing at all. The photograph was intimate in a way that made people uncomfortable. Meghan, in a luxury hotel hallway, angled toward a man who was very clearly not Prince Harry. The lighting was warm, the space private, the moment unguarded. His arm around her waist crossed a line that didn't look accidental. His build was wrong, music, his posture wrong, and on his wrist, a leather bracelet with a small metal cross pendant. Eagle-eyed users moved fast, music too fast. That bracelet, they claimed, matched one worn by a Colombian businessman who'd appeared briefly in promotional footage months earlier. Screenshots multiplied, shadows were enhanced, jewelry compared. The man wasn't tall and lanky like Harry. He was solid, athletic, music, confident in a way that read money, not monarchy. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the account vanished, deleted, scrubbed, professional. But screenshots are forever. Right on cue, Tom Bauer Music stepped forward, not with hysteria, not with emojis, but with a single chilling line. Some stories don't disappear when you delete them. They disappear when the truth is proven. This one hasn't been. Then the sentence that froze the internet in this world: the firstborn child may not belong to the man the public believes. No names, no accusations, just implications, sharp enough to cut glass. Hours later, the announcement dropped. A new podcast series, weekly episodes, documents, witnesses, a promise not of spectacle, but of exposure. "I've interviewed hundreds," Music Bauer said in the teaser. "I've reviewed records from Hollywood to Columbia. What I found changes everything." Harry's camp responded with noise, denials, fury, threats. But noise doesn't extinguish fire. It feeds it. And still no DNA test. Episode 1 dropped on a Friday night, when defenses are down and curiosity is high. Tom's voice was calm, methodical, almost gentle, which made it worse. He spoke of documents linked music to Archie's birth. Medical inconsistencies, sealed details that deviated from royal precedent. No hospital confirmations, no named doctors, no timestamps, just vague statements and tightly managed appearances. Then he rewound the story 2 weeks earlier. A private California villa, phones banned, a guest list so elite it barely existed on paper. Tech billionaires, Hollywood power brokers, a jet loan, a charity trip to Kolia, and something left behind. A leather briefcase discovered by a night shift cleaner. Inside, according to this account, was a high-resolution print of the same hotel hallway image. Clearer, closer, undeniable. And that's where the story stopped pretending to be gossip and started becoming something darker. Because now the question wasn't what people were saying. It was why so much effort had gone into keeping it buried. And somewhere in California, Prince Harry listened, feeling something unfamiliar crawl up his spine. Not anger, fear. Because if this was what Bauer was willing to release just to provoke a reaction, what on earth was he still holding back? And why, when one simple test could end it, music all, was no one willing to take it? That silence wasn't just loud, it was devastating. Music by the time episode 2, the atmosphere had shifted from scandal to something far more volatile. Belief. Music and belief, once it takes hold, is far more dangerous than proof. Proof waits for courts and laboratories. Belief spreads through instinct, through pattern recognition, through that gut-level sense that something simply doesn't add up. Tom Bauer understood that distinction better than anyone. He didn't accuse, he didn't declare. He curated doubt with the precision of a surgeon. Every sentence was measured, every pause intentional. He never crossed the legal line because he didn't need to. The audience did the work for him. Episode 2 opened without music. No dramatic intro, no build-up, just the faint music sound of a throat clearing. "Tonight," Tom said evenly, "I'm not speaking to an anonymous source. I'm speaking to a man who lived this." And then a voice filled the feed that listeners hadn't heard in years. Trevor Angelson didn't sound bitter. That's what unsettled people most. He sounded tired. Music the kind of tired that comes from watching the world celebrate. A version of history music you know isn't clean. While you sit quietly holding details no one ever asked for, he didn't begin with accusations. He began with context. The early marriage, the ambition, the shift, subtle at first, then unmistakable. How Meghan's focus sharpened as doors opened. how international contacts appeared suddenly, aggressively, how secrecy grew alongside opportunity. She wasn't cheating in the way people imagine, Trevor said in this telling. It wasn't emotional, it was strategic. That single word detonated comment sections across the internet. Strategic. Trevor described late nights, unexplained music trips, conversations that stopped the moment he entered a room. He spoke about how he'd learned not to ask certain questions because the answers came wrapped in condescension. You don't think big enough. You wouldn't understand how this works. Then he described the night, the hotel, the hallway. His temper flaring unpredictably, his fixation on reaction videos he swore he wasn't watching. Music, he was watching all of it. The worst part wasn't Trevor's story, it was the timelines. Online sleuths lined up dates with ruthless precision. The Colombia trip, the Australia tour, the shifting pregnancy announcement, the absence of medical specifics, the lack of traditional documentation, the unusually controlled appearances before and after Archie's birth. Individually, each detail could be explained away. Together, they formed something that looked uncomfortably like intent. Harry began asking questions he'd never allowed himself to ask about dates, about doctors, about why everything surrounding Archie's birth music had felt so managed, so curated, so insulated from scrutiny, and Megan felt it. In this telling, she noticed the shift immediately. The way Harry stopped meeting her eyes, the way his questions lost their softness, the way he lingered in silences she once filled effortlessly. When he finally said it quietly, almost pleading, the room seemed to freeze. Why won't you just do the test? She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She went still, greater than, and Prince Harry are sharing a peek at life in California with little Archie. Greater than, and then she turned it on him with surgical precision. How dare you, she snapped. After everything I've endured for you, for this family, you're siding with them. Them, the royals, the media, Tom Bauer, the mob, anyone but herself. Harry shouted back. Not eloquently, music not diplomatically, but like a man whose identity was collapsing in real time. This isn't about them, he said. This is about me not knowing if my son is actually mine. Music, that was the moment. According to this narrative, something irreparable cracked. Megan accused him of betrayal, of internalized prejudice. Music of letting palace paranoia poison his mind. She listed sacrifices, headlines, pain she claimed she'd absorbed for him. And then she delivered the line that stopped the argument cold. If you force this, she said quietly, you destroy us. Not if you're right. If you force it. Harry left the room without answering. Music outside the world was growing louder by the hour. A former palace staffer appeared anonymously online, claiming delays in Archie's titles had been tied to unresolved documentation concerns. Another alleged meetings had taken place behind closed doors that were unprecedented in modern royal history, none of it verified, all of it devastating. Music, Buckingham Palace, stayed silent, and silence once again did the most damage. Tom Bauer returned to the same phrase in interviews, never raising his voice, never dramatizing. Music, innocent people, he said calmly. Don't fear verification. Music, by the time episode 3 was teased, the public question had shifted entirely. It was no longer, is this true? It was, what are they hiding? And how long can they keep hiding music? And inside a mansion built on sunlight, luxury, and carefully curated narratives. Prince Harry sat alone with a realization that terrified him more than any headline ever could. That the rebellion he built his life around, the family he abandoned, the crown he walked away from, might all have been sacrificed for a story he never fully verified. Music, and once doubt takes root, it doesn't wait for facts. It destroys everything in its path. By the time the third installment unfolded, the damage no longer lived in headlines. It lived in hesitation, in pauses. In the music way, people stopped defending automatically and started listening instead. That was the real shift. Tom Bauer didn't need to escalate. He slowed down. Episode 3 opened with a timeline. Not accusations, not conclusions. Just dates laid out with unnerving calm. Dates that, when placed side by side, created discomfort without ever stating why. Listeners leaned in because their minds were already racing ahead of him. He spoke about patterns, about how institutions behave when certainty exists versus when it doesn't. about how the monarchy has historically responded to rumors that are baseless compared to situations that require containment rather than denial. "This isn't about scandal," Tom said in his measured tone. "It's about process. Music and process tell stories. Facts don't have to." He walked through precedents, how royal births had always been announced, documented, confirmed, the medical signatures, the hospital confirmations, the ritualized transparency designed to remove doubt before it could ever take root. And then he contrasted it with what wasn't there in this scenario. No names, no signatures, no customary markers. Again, he didn't accuse. He asked, why change a system that has worked for centuries unless deviation served a purpose? That question alone ignited days of debate. Supporters called it insinuation. Critics called it inquiry. Music-neutral observers called it unsettling. But everyone called it deliberate. Behind the scenes, according to this imagined account, Harry's world was shrinking. Friends who once reassured him now hesitated before speaking. Advisors chose their words carefully. Even casual conversations felt loaded, every silence louder than the last. He found himself replaying moments he'd brushed aside for years. Conversations he'd laughed off. Decisions he'd trusted without examining. Doubt doesn't arrive as a storm. Music, it arrives as erosion. Late one night, unable to sleep, Harry reportedly returned to old emails. Old texts, travel confirmations, harmless details that suddenly felt heavier under scrutiny. He wasn't looking for proof. He was looking for reassurance, and he wasn't finding it. Meghan, sensing the shift, leaned harder into control. In this telling, music she tightened the perimeter, trusted allies only. Conversations redirected, questions reframed as attacks. The narrative, once fluid, became rigid, defensive. That rigidity was noticed. Public appearances grew more scripted, interviews more combative. Every denial sounded rehearsed, every explanation layered with grievance. The warmth that once disarmed critics gave way to a sharper edge. People didn't turn against her overnight. They grew cautious. In parallel, online communities continued assembling timelines, not as declarations, but as puzzles. They spoke in hypotheticals, used music disclaimers, asked questions instead of making claims. But the collective effect was music the same. Curiosity hardened into suspicion. And suspicion doesn't need proof to survive. Tom Bauer returned again. Not with new allegations, but with voices. Experts speaking generally about identity, legitimacy, and the psychological toll of uncertainty. A genealogist discussed bloodlines in abstract terms. A legal scholar spoke about why institutions fear ambiguity more than scandal. A child psychologist spoke about the long-term impact of unresolved questions on parental bonding. That segment hit Harry hardest, because suddenly this wasn't about headlines or reputations. It was about a relationship. Music about whether doubt, once planted, could ever be uprooted. In this imagined world, Harry confronted Meghan again, not with anger this time, but music exhaustion. "I just need certainty," he said quietly. "For him, for me." Her response, according to the narrative, wasn't denial. It was deflection. Why now? Why this way? Why let outsiders dictate our lives? And then once again, the line that haunted him. If you go down this road, nothing survives it. Not because it's false, because it would expose something, music, truth, lie, or ambiguity that could no longer be managed. Outside their walls, the story evolved again. A former journalist spoke hypothetically about why some narratives are aggressively protected. A royal historian reminded audiences that legitimacy has always been the monarchy's most fragile currency. A commentator noted that the silence from all official corners was becoming conspicuous. Silence had become the loudest voice in the room. By the end of episode 3, Tom Bauer closed with a statement that felt less like a threat and more like an inevitability. "Stories like this," he said calmly, "don't end when people deny them. They end when certainty replaces doubt. And until that happens, the questions will keep asking themselves." The episode ended without music. In this telling, Harry sat alone afterward, not furious, not panicked, just hollowed out by the weight of not knowing. The identity he'd built as protector, music, husband, father, rebel, all of it depended on trust. And trust, once cracked, doesn't shatter loudly. It splinters. Meanwhile, Meghan stared at her phone, music watching the world speculate, analyze, hesitate. She wasn't afraid of scandal. She'd survived that before. What unsettled her was something else entirely. Loss of control. Because narratives can be shaped. Perception can be guided. But once doubt migrates into belief, it no longer belongs to the person at the center of the story. It belongs to everyone else. And the world in this universe wasn't waiting for accusations anymore. It was waiting for resolution. By the time the fourth movement of this saga unfolded, the world had stopped shouting and started waiting. Waiting is more dangerous. Tom Bauer understood that. He didn't rush episode 4. He let the silence ferment. Let speculation mature into expectation. Music, by the time the teaser dropped, nothing more than a black screen and a single sentence. Millions were already bracing. When institutions stopped denying it, because they've started preparing music, that line did what no accusation ever could. It reframed everything.